Everyone, so we're going to get started. As you certainly heard, we were working on some back-end Skype action. We will have a live video feed from one of our panelists who's currently in New Zealand at the moment. We're bringing you a global panel here today. And I do want to welcome you to, I think it's one of the first events that the Ed Policy Early Ed Group and the Open Technology Initiative, which I run, are doing jointly. And I have a soft spot in my heart for a lot of school issues, school reform issues. My undergrad and master's thesis were all focused on school reform issues. I'm not entirely sure how I ended up directing a technology outfit, but here I am. And I would say that this is for me, very exciting. About, I guess it was about 8-10 years ago now, I was working for a for-profit doing ed technologies. It was for a large publishing house. We were designing sort of their curricula for an undergraduate economics course. And going through there and realizing all of the biases firsthand that were built into the technologies and all of the limitations and all of the ways in which the technology itself was being created to create additional billable moments for students and for schools. I got to build this thing, so I was part of the problem, to say the least. But I think when I look at where we've come in the last half decade or so, and the possibilities for everything from massive cost cuts to better, more tailored curricula, to technologies being utilized to empower students and teachers, it's odd to me how little we have done as a country to actually integrate all of these best practices and certainly better practices into our day-to-day lives within the school system. So I'm joined today both by Lisa, my compadre, my comrade in arms working on these issues, and also by a panel of 4 experts in this field, some of whom I've known, several of whom are completely new to me. So I'm very excited to hear what they have to say. So we have Tim Vollner from Creative Commons, Lynn Munson from Common Core, Michael Levine from, let me see if I got this right, the Joan Ganz Cooney Center. Fantastic. And Mark Osborne, who will be the voice of God coming down through the speakers. But we should have him streaming live when it's his turn to participate. And their bios are here. We're going to give them each a few minutes to sort of introduce themselves. But to really sort of get us kicked off and started, I'm going to turn it over actually to Lisa Guernsey, who's the director of the Early Ed Initiative here at New America, to sort of give us a framework to get things started. So please welcome Lisa.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on an early Monday morning. This is exciting for us because we are joining together our 2 initiatives here at New America, Open Technology Initiative and the Early Ed Initiative, in what we hope is actually symbolic of a coming together that we're hoping to see in the policy world when it comes to education and technology. And what both Sasha and I have talked about many times is that for years it seems that there's a conversation about education and technology and how they need to be bridged, but it's always a relatively shallow conversation on a lot of levels, and it's not about the core of what's happening in the classroom and what the reality is for teachers who are working in the classroom. It also is often industry-led and promoted, which means it's not necessarily about making technology as accessible as possible to teachers. It's more about kind of what devices need to be and how many hands and how many seats need to be kind of purchased or how many logins need to be purchased. So we thought that this was a really good way to try to turn a corner on these conversations. And if you've read the title of today's event, you'll see that we've called it Opening Up Technology in Service of Teaching. And the beginning and the end of that are the most important pieces of this to us. So opening up is going to be a big part of our conversation today, and I'm really excited to hear from our panelists about what that can really mean and how we can open things up, both in terms of open source, but also just in terms of accessibility and the ability to kind of use tools in an easy way. But the second part, in service of teaching, is critical to this, because if we're talking about technology without thinking about what it's in service of, without thinking of it as a tool, then we've missed the point. So I want to put out 2 reasons why I think we are at a really interesting turning point for this right now. One is that, as many of you who are in the education space may know, there is a lot of dismay out there right now over the state of of public education, or how students are, quote, performing in school. And there are statistics that are often recounted on our graduation rates, and how low they are. In some high schools, it's 50% of students who are graduating on time, and our reading rates are very low as well. And so, coming from the early education space, that's something that we talk about and think about a lot. Is how is it that we've gotten to this place where 2/3 of 4th graders are not proficient in reading, are not reading at grade level, and what other tools should we be using and giving teachers to make this easier for them and for students? So that's the first, the fact that we're at this really, I think, critical juncture where a lot of people are getting incredibly concerned about the state of public education in this country, and documentaries like Waiting for Superman are amplifying that. The second thing is that, and this is something that many people on the technology side may not have paid as much attention to, but there has been a major change in the past year on the education side in the adoption of common standards across states. And Lynn Munson will be talking a little bit more about this today, but this, I think, opens up some new opportunities for collaboration and creation of content that can be used nationwide or across borders in new ways, because at this point we have, I believe it's 36 states, the last I checked, we're up to 36 states that have adopted these common standards for each grade, kindergarten up through 12th grade. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted to kind of put those 2 pieces out there from the education side as why, basically that's kind of setting the stage for why this is a really important conversation to be having right now. And we also, as many of you in the room might know, that there's been from the federal level, a new technology plan that has been put out by the U.S. Department of Education, the National Ed Tech Plan. So that also, I think, offers us some opportunities. So let me tell you how we're going to proceed today. We really do want to make this a conversation as much as possible. And Sasha and I are going to be taking a good bit of our time to question and prod our speakers and panelists. And so we're going to tag team that a little bit. But to get started, what we wanted to do is have our panelists come up and answer one question to kind of get them started. And we're going to do that one by one, simply because a couple of them have some slides that they'd like to show, and it's hard for everyone to see when they're all up here together. But by the time that we've gotten to kind of the 4th panelist and the 4th question, all 4 of them will be here. And then Sasha and I will kind of trade back and forth with a couple of questions for everybody. And then we're very much looking forward to hearing from the room as well, and hopefully facilitating a real discussion this morning. So I'd like to get started with Tim Vollmer, and I will welcome Tim up in a moment. And Tim, as you know, is with Creative Commons. I won't go into a long bio because you have that material that was handed out this morning when you came in. But there are a lot of opportunities here, and Creative Commons is kind of leading the way in much of this. So I thank you, Tim, for being here. And let me, as you're walking up, I will give you your question. We basically wanted to know, Tim, if you can tell us, how can Creative Commons be of use to educators, and what do teachers need to know about it to make it useful to them? So, thank you.
Okay, that's working. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and to Sasha and to New America for inviting me to come speak on this fantastic panel. Creative Commons is a small nonprofit organization based in San Francisco with about 30 employees kind of in total around the world. And our mission is really to create, develop, and steward the legal and technical infrastructure that makes sharing possible, that makes sharing legal, scalable, and easy to do for teachers, for scientists, and for just creators in general. And, excuse me, one of the most apparent ways we do this is by offering free copyright licenses that allows these groups of people to share their creations on more flexible terms than all rights-reserved copyright. And we try to make the licenses as easy to use as possible. This is really key. And there's only 2 steps in applying a Creative Commons license to your work. One is by going to creativecommons.org, where you can just do this. One is to choose the conditions that you want to apply to your work. Now, all Creative Commons licenses require attribution to the original author. And after that, users can decide what conditions they want to apply to the work, whether to prohibit commercial uses, whether to make sure that users share alike their creations, and whether the work should be only available as is. And step 2 is to simply receive the license that reflects your conditions. Now, there are 6 Creative Commons licenses that reflect a spectrum of rights. And for instance, the photos that I share on the Flickr, I released under the attribution license. That's the license in the upper left, which basically means that anyone can download my photos, can reshare my photos, as long as they give me credit. An important thing that Creative Commons has developed is that the licenses are displayed in 3 ways. First, there's a human-readable deed that kind of simplifies the terms of each license in language that everyone can understand. Second is the lawyer-readable legal code, and this text has been vetted by global legal experts from around the world. And Creative Commons licenses are enforceable in a court of law. And then finally, there's machine-readable metadata that enables the content to be discovered by search engines like Google and Yahoo. So CC... Well, uh-oh. Great. So CC is really used around the world. The licenses are ported to 53 countries. 10 more are in progress. Approximately 365 million pieces of CC licensed content are available on the web. Things you might have heard of, I just mentioned Flickr, the photo sharing website, Wikipedia with its 16 million articles available in 270 languages, musicians, filmmakers, governments, whitehouse.gov, any third-party content added to White House Gov is released under a Creative Commons license. Cultural heritage institutions, open access, scholarly publishing journals, scientists. One of the most compelling uses of Creative Commons licenses and tools is in support of open educational resources, or OER. And OER are teaching and learning resources that are available in the public domain or released under a copyright license that allows their free use and remixing. And OER includes things like OCW. You might have heard of MIT's OCW, OpenCourseWare. Open repositories, which are modules of CC licensed content that teachers can take and remix for their own use. Some examples there are Connections, Curriki, or the website OER Commons. And also open textbooks. This has kind of been one of the hot topics lately, such as Flat World Knowledge of producing open textbooks, as well as CK12. And one of the things that open textbooks do is really allow content to be customized and more affordable. I mentioned Flat World Knowledge. This is a relatively new startup commercial textbook publisher that incorporates the CC licensing right into their base business plan. It offers free online access to textbooks and allows teachers to customize those textbooks. And it offers affordable print-on-demand and other sort of supplemental materials for purchase. And Flatworld's really doing it the right way. They're hiring quality authors, they're doing professionally edited content, and they're providing customer service. And in fact, over 800 colleges are using Flatworld Knowledge textbooks this year. An estimated cost savings of $12 million for 150,000 students. In the K-12 space, CK12 has been offering lots of open textbooks, and they were really one of the first ones to offer what they call a Flexbook. The state of Virginia hired CK12 to develop their high school physics textbook. And one of my favorite examples, Chuck Severance from the University of Michigan, an old professor of mine, remixed a computer science textbook in under 11 days for his upcoming course in network computing by using another openly licensed textbook. And the University of Michigan also has a what's called an espresso printing machine, essentially like a high volume kind of print on demand. And his students were able to purchase that textbook for $10. Another way that Creative Commons licensed OER can help is with language and accessibility considerations. I talked about MIT OpenCourseware before. Over 800 MIT courses have been translated into languages other than English, and this is made possible by the open license. Users can translate without needing to ask permission from the copyright holder, and this is key. Another organization, Bookshare, it's the world's largest accessible online library for persons with print disabilities. And I think last year they were awarded a grant by the Department of Ed to create the first accessible versions of open content digital textbooks. And we really see this as one of the keys, that content released under an open license can be converted into accessible formats for view on mobile technologies, to audiobooks, for Braille refresh readers, all without additional royalty costs, since the rights are pre-cleared via the open license, via the Creative Commons license. One of the most important considerations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is with search and discovery. Last year, Maine did a survey of some teachers working in technology and open education, and it showed that 88% of the teachers use Google to search for their OER. And this is important because the CC licensed content is integrated with Google and Yahoo search. So we're going to where the teachers are trying to find the content. Essentially, Google indexes things on whether or not it is licensed with a Creative Commons license. We've also been developing some in-house tools. One is an experimental search prototype called DiscoverEd. And DiscoverEd is essentially an OER search engine that's built on the basis of content curators, basically sources that we trust for high-quality OER, those connections, those OER Commons sites, Curriki sites. And the engine is populated by using content feeds from those sites, similar to like RSS feeds that you get in your reader. And the interesting about DiscoverEd is that it does essentially what Google does, the text indexing of the content, but also uses structured data models to pull in good metadata about the content. So not only text indexing, but indexing other sorts of metadata, such as what is the license that this resource is available under? What language is this resource available under? What grade level is this resource intended for? So those are some of the things that we've been working on. And we'd like to continue this work, and we think that a lot of this Creative Commons licensed tools can be of great use for teachers, and I look forward to the questions that are coming up in a little bit.
So I'll have Lynn come up in a minute here, and what I want Lynn to do is, Lynn, I'm curious about how the Common Core standards may change things in terms of what teachers can do and what tools are available to them in terms of technology. So let us know what your Curriculum Maps project can teach us about how common standards make things different now. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sasha, also for inviting Common Core to participate in this. I also have to add a big thank you to my mother, who is here today. Mom, raise your hand. She's not just responsible for my being here generally, but she's actually responsible for my being here today because I can't drive. I hurt my arm over the weekend. So thank you, Mom, for rushing me here. Common Core is not the same as the Common Core of the Common Core State Standards Project. First, I want to just make that abundantly clear. Common Core, the organization that I lead, is a nonprofit research and advocacy organization that was created back in 2007. A number of education leaders came together. They include union leaders, teachers, textbook authors, former chief state school officers, current superintendents of schools, a number of folks who actually disagree about a whole wide group of things, but agree very, very much about the importance of content knowledge in K-12 education. These folks are all concerned that there's been kind of a series of trends over the years pushing the focus of content knowledge kind of to the margins of the educational discussion. So they wanted to create Common Core, which we thought was a pretty unique name when we came up with it 4 years ago, to create more of a more substantive discussion about content knowledge and really specifically about high-quality curriculum and curriculum materials. So we've been around for a while. We're not the Common Core State Standards. When the National Governors Association and Chief State Council for Chief State School Officers began their project, they did start using the phrase Common Core, and so we get a lot more phone calls now. What can I say? The irony, though, is that I am here to talk to you today about a project that we have done that is not just related to the Common Core State Standards. It's based, really, on the Common Core State Standards in English Language Arts. And that is that Common Core has created a series of curriculum maps. They cover the kindergarten through 12th grades, all 13 grades. And they are, I wouldn't say just based on the Common Core State Standards, they're kind of born out of the Common Core State Standards. Those standards, of course, have actually been adopted now by 39 states. There were a few more just last week. And they will become, when fully implemented over the course of the next couple of years, the standards, they will replace, in 39 states, the standards that those states currently have in English language arts and math, because states actually have to adopt both sets of standards. And they will represent at least 85% of those state standards in those two subjects. So states can add 15% of their own material if they'd like, but that's all the wiggle room that they have. So as we started speaking with and advising the folks at NGA and CCSSO, it became evident to us that the standards that were being developed were largely going to be kind of skill-based standards. There was not going to be they were going to be very content, I would not even say content friendly, they're actually going to be content dependent, because the way in which they describe content and rigor and grade level appropriateness of text chosen is very dependent on a very deep relationship with content. But the content wasn't actually going to be in the standards. So the standards do not say when students need to start learning, when students should first be introduced to knowledge of the American Revolution or the Civil War or particular works of literature, for example. They simply talk about the skills relevant to those kind of learnings. So we decided that we should embark upon this project of creating curriculum maps that would marry up the skills of the standards with the content knowledge that kids need at every grade. And that is what we've endeavored to do. The maps are broken down, so I said they're year by year, K through 12, and they break down the year into six-week units per year, and those are thematic. They array the texts and the content knowledge that students need to learn, along with a long group of texts that are suggested for teachers to use in the process of teaching that material. They're flexible and adaptable. They don't tell teachers how to teach. They're very far from anything anyone would call a script. And they're not even documents that teachers can just take in the classroom and start teaching from. They're really planning materials that teachers could say, okay, over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to embark upon this unit, excuse me, and I'm going to use this map to help me start thinking about how I'm going to cover that material, how I'm going to cover those standards very effectively. I'll walk you through a map in a moment. They were created by public school teachers for public school teachers. Nobody but a public school teacher wrote any word in our curriculum maps, and they were reviewed while they were under development by teachers from the American Federation of Teachers, the National Alliance of Black School Educators, and winners of the Milken Educational Award. Our project is fully funded by the Gates Foundation. Now I'm looking for the example of our unit, which I believe is supposed to be the next slide. Do you know how I find that, Lisa? Should I keep going?
Because it's so long, so I think Mike's going to, he's going to put it up on the screen for you in a minute.
Okay. I'll talk about this slide while we're working on that. And this simply, I was talking before about the importance of content knowledge and how our organization really exists for the purpose of calling attention to that. Cognitive scientists have proven time and again that if students can't just learn to read and kind of learn reading skills completely, at least not effectively, if that skill teaching is totally disembodied from content knowledge teaching. And so I hesitate to go back to the other slide, but the slide I just showed you actually kind of arrays the content in all of our curriculum maps into one big graphic that kind of shows what subjects, what authors, what topics, what issues, events get particular emphasis in our maps, and what other material is also included. So this is an example of one of our maps. So our project consists of about 75 of what I'm about to show you. And how do I scroll down, Lisa? Do you know? I'll just point out as she's...
Maybe that it's funky with this kind of mouse.
Okay. What did you do?
Well, let's see. There we go. See, this guy has to move. If you want to just, instead of, just for speed, why don't you just describe a little bit of what we see here, and then, as people are talking, we can, later when we're discussing
things. Can you go back to the top by chance?
Let me see.
Can we do that? Just because I didn't even talk about the top at all.
Fuzzy kind of mouse. It doesn't really want to do it.
There we go.
That was
okay. So this
our wizard
can
in
you
the back.
Do this? No, I'm going to let you do this for me. Okay. So this is the top of the unit. This unit, it's from the 8th grade, the 3rd unit, so about midway through 8th grade. As you can see, we really thought about internet interactivity from the beginning of this project. I mean, this was an internet-based project from the beginning. There's the ability for teachers to come in and comment overall about the unit. They can rate the unit in just kind of a, just a kind of a basic consumer kind of way when one does ratings. And you'll see as we look down that this kind of interactivity continues throughout. There's an essential question you'll see over there on the far side. This is kind of a question that hangs in the air in the course of the unit while it's being discussed. Perhaps students talk at the end of the unit about trying to answer the question. And this is just a brief overview about what this unit is about. So we can go to the next one. These are the standards. This is just cut and pasted from the Common Core state standards, which themselves are online, but are just one giant PDF document that one really can't navigate very well. So we've come up with our own citation system for the standards. And these were very carefully selected, each set of standards in the unit to be compatible with the content and the various student objectives in the unit. So these are the things that the students are expected to be able to know and be able to do by the time the unit is finished.
And actually, then, since it's kind of tricky to see the rest of it, if you just give maybe one last example, and then we'll.
So these are just some of the texts that we've arrayed for teachers to choose from in order to teach the unit, and the only is going to be hopeless for my ability to do. But the only other thing we have there are very long lists of sample activities and assessment ideas that teachers can use. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Len. I just want it's really, it does help sometimes to see it, although it also helps a lot more to play with it online, and so maybe many of you in the room will have a chance to do that later, to really see what teachers can get into and start using because this is accessible to them. So we're going to now have Michael Levine come up, and Michael, I was wondering, I want you to tell me, and those of us in the room, a little bit more about the teacher preparation ideas that you've had. Because at this point we're at a place where you could say, this is great, but can teachers use any of this in the classroom, and what do they need to do so? Thanks.
Darn it, I had a 20-minute PowerPoint and I was going to jam into 5 minutes, but hi, I'm Michael Levine. I run something called the Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. You have a bio. Just really quickly, we focus a lot on the affordances of digital media to accelerate children's learning. We're particularly interested in this fourth grade literacy gap, which keeps me up at night and should keep our nation up at night as well. And we've been looking at a whole range of different ways to use public media assets such as those arrayed at great organizations like my home, Sesame Workshop, in service of closing or at least addressing some of these fundamental gaps. We've been concentrating on three main issues, and I'll get to the teacher performance issue in a moment. One is the connections or lack thereof, I call it a moat, that exists between informal learning and formal learning, and is there a way in a new learning paradigm to connect what kids are doing, basically wearing in their informal days. They're wearing media, for crying out loud, and connecting it to what's going on in that place called school, which is constraining it through filters and bans and a variety of different ways in which media are not being integrated into the classroom. Secondly, we really believe strongly that parents and caregivers and teachers need to form a new intergenerational compact with children around the use of media. And we're looking at sort of the initial insights of Sesame Street, which to this day encourages generational co-viewing. And we're trying to look at the new joint media equation where you could take the insight of a celebrity, a jingle, and a comment on desperate houseplants, which is engaging to both adults and children at different levels of engagement, and how can you connect those things? The thing that I think that Lisa really wanted me to focus on today is a new council, actually a council that we convened earlier this year with Stanford University, Linda Darling-Hammond, and Bridget Barron, called the Digital Age Teacher Council, whose members and who will meet for their final meeting here in Washington, actually at Pew Center of States this coming Friday, to discuss a draft of a council report which is focusing on how digital media assets, particularly those that live in the hallowed halls of public media producers such as Sesame Workshop, could be newly connected to teaching for a digital and for a global age. And the council, whose report will be out in December, I just want to give you a preview of one idea that we've been advancing within the council for something called the Digital Age Teacher Corps. The insight here is that there are tens of billions of dollars of public investment in public media assets, and they're hardly ever deployed in schools. And so is there a way that we could take wonderful things like the 40-year library of Sesame Street, or the variety of different assets that are available at WGBH or at WNET, and find ways to open this content up for educators educators' uses. And there are a variety of really interesting new initiatives that are available, things like PBS Teachers Online, Teachers Domain, which is WGBH. But is there a way of taking these tools and put them in the hands of teachers at the street level? So the digital teacher core idea, which was advanced first by me and a games developer, James Paul G. from Arizona State University, would have 4 or 5 different components. First, the core would begin its operations in the 3,000 lowest performing elementary schools. These are the schools in America that are responsible for well over half of that 4th grade reading slump that Lisa Guernsey referred to. These core members, the core would begin with 2 teachers per school or school cluster. One of the teachers would focus on curriculum and staff development needs, much as current literacy and math coaches do. The other one would be an opening up technology expert to integrate public media assets and other OER resources to attack these gaps. Each core member would be a master teacher connected either to national board certification or a university-based lab school or a teacher center in the community. They would focus explicitly on ways to enact pedagogical reforms aligned with the 4th grade Common Core requirements, first in literacy and then in math. The core would also be supported by a virtual or real connection to public service media, either through a local PBS affiliate or through a new online scheme, such as the ones created by PBS, Sesame Workshop, WGBH, as I've just described, and also would take in the insights of virtual online leaders, such as Florida Virtual School or the Kentucky Virtual Schools, as kind of a way to array assets for the local community. Each of the core members would have special access to a panoply of what I would call new learning objects that would be deployed via interactive whiteboards, games-based platforms, mobile-based platforms, mobile devices. The core would be highly networked. Think about a 5,000 to 6,000 member network rolled out over a 5-year period, forming a powerful national community, perhaps in conjunction with innovative groups like the New Teacher Center, Teach for America, National Writing Project. These are some of the more heavily networked projects that exist in the country today. And the assessments of these new core members would be based less on individual student performance and more on school-based performance measures, so that we would get a more robust sense of their impact around transforming schools and eventually districts. This idea is just getting started. It is not fully cooked. I put it out there in the interest of welcoming debate and discussion. I think I'd close by saying that there is so much need for taking the investments that we've made in public media infrastructure and bringing these technologies into the school, and we would be foolish not to take the opportunity to think in new ways. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. So we now have the wonderful Mark Osborne from New Zealand. He's the deputy principal of the New Albany High School there. And I just have to say, and you guys see him on the screen now, so Mark, say hello to everyone.
Hi, everyone.
In New Zealand right now, it is 2:40 in the morning. Is that correct, Mark? So he's a real trooper to be doing this for us live. We at one point were talking about perhaps videotaping, and he's like, "No, I'll do it. I'll wake up." So, Mark, thank you very much. What I wanted to pose to you, and then I'm looking forward to kind of getting much more into the conversation we're going to have. After you've spoken for a few minutes, we're going to have everyone come who's spoken already and sit up here together, and we can kind of turn to see you as well when you're answering questions. But just right now, if you could please tell us, what does it mean to be an open source high school, and how does that help teachers? Thanks.
We have a saying here that it's the question's no longer if you were bright, it's how you were bright. And for us, that means that in addition to achievement in the 3 R's, every student who comes through our door has some kind of unique talent, in many cases lots of unique talents, and our job as educators is to find those talents and to nurture them and to make the most of them. And there's a lot of research to support the fact that high achievement in one area, and that unique talent will lead to high achievement in other areas in school. And so using a really strengths-based model, what we did when we were putting the school together, our school's been going for coming up to 2 years now, was we looked at that saying, it's no longer if you're bright, but how you're bright. And we realized that it doesn't matter whether you're a mountain climber, an explorer, or a fashion designer, or an astronomer. You need digital tools in today's society, in today's global world. We looked at all of the digital tools that all of our learners with their unique talents might need, and we came up with a very long list of software that needed to be installed on every computer in the school. And we just scratched our heads because it simply wasn't achievable for even a really well-resourced school. And so we started thinking differently. We started thinking, well, there must be alternatives. And we looked at free software literally that you can install on any computer that you have access to. And at that point we decided that it was so important to nurture these unique talents that we really needed to think in a different paradigm. So we've pulled together the most incredible collection of software, as I say, on every computer, whether it's music composition or 3D modeling or mind mapping software. It also means for students that they have access to these really powerful tools wherever they are. We know that learning no longer happens between 9 and 3. It happens wherever the students are. It happens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so these using free software instead of proprietary or pay software means that they can install it at home, they can install it on mum's laptop, at dad's work, wherever they are, legally, and be able to carry on learning. And it also has advantages for differentiating or meeting students' needs. If you're not very good at video editing, you're going to need a different application from somebody who's very good at video editing. Schools, in most cases, will just decide on something in the middle of the road, and you need to match your skills with the software that's provided. What we're able to do is provide 4 different video editing applications, from entry level right the way through to very sophisticated non-linear video editing. And students will often cut their teeth on the really easy stuff and then move on to the more sophisticated software. So there's enormous advantages in terms of cost for the school, huge savings, 6-figure sum for us as one school alone, but also that cost is not a burden that we place on our communities. So if you want to carry on working on your video editing, if we were using proprietary software, you would either have to pay hundreds of dollars to buy the software, or you would be locked out of that learning. And there's an equity issue around that as well, that we shouldn't be encouraging the use of tools that favour people who have a bit more money than other people in society. It also stretches to the online learning environments that we use. We have a learning management system which we use to provide students with resources and run tests and get feedback and show videos. Those are online environments. They're open source as well. So it means that we have a really powerful suite of tools that is open and available to us. The learning management system we use has a community of 45 million users worldwide, so it's under heavy development. There are lots of new tools emerging all the time for us to use, and it's about tapping into the power of that community. And that community is so large because it's free software, because anybody can open it up and start using it. We also, when we're looking at that, so that's the tools side of things, our students processing and producing things, we also looked at free content as well. And it started by acknowledging that traditional, dry, boring, black and white textbooks are increasingly irrelevant in today's media-rich world. Particularly for our young people, they have incredible multimedia devices available to them all the time, and we need to try and leverage those devices to help them learn. And so we're looking at an alternative to textbooks that were the multimedia and they're flexible enough to be able to be read on just about any device. And we came across the open courseware movement and started to think about the other potentials that open courseware presented us, and that was as Tim mentioned, the remixability, the ability to take chapters of a textbook. If you don't like chapter 2, you can pull in a different chapter 2 that somebody else has written, or even write one yourself. There's also the portability as well. So again, whether it's on an iPod or a small laptop or a big computer at home, you get access to the same information, and you can't say, I couldn't do it because I left it in my locker. That portability is really important as well. And then we also started getting our head around the fact that in this open courseware and through Creative Commons licensing, the students could actually be contributing to the courseware. And that was a kind of a quantum leap for us, because there's lots of again, research to support the fact that if students are active collaborators and contributors to the content that they're studying, they're more likely to know that information deeply than if they're just passive recipients memorizing it. And so the students at our school actually write the textbooks, contribute to the textbooks as they move through the course. So we have a group of students who have recorded video tutorials of how to apply particular maths skills and solve maths problems. And they've uploaded their videos, and they're sitting now in the textbook for other students to use and other students to provide alternatives to, or to provide better versions of those videos. So they're much more active. It means that the burden of producing the content is spread across all teachers in the world. So we can hook into your textbooks, you can hook into ours, but it's also spread across all the students of the world. And there's a really significant learning gain outside of the kind of efficiencies and the economies. And I think Tim mentioned before the issue of language. It's very, very easy to translate and to remix our existing content into different languages, so that it's a truly global project. So that's the free software and free content, the two sides to being an open source school.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark, very much. And you can't see us all here. It's hard to understand the reaction, but it's really helpful to hear that description and to know that the school's only been open for 2 years or so, and you've been able to do that much. So we're going to now have Lynn and Tim and Michael come up, and Sasha and I are going to open up with a couple of questions, and we're going to try, all of us, to keep this really tight and to answer quickly if you can. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Sasha to open with the first question. And Mark, since you can't see everyone up here, feel free to, just, verbally kind of butt in if you need to, or to say, I'd like to say something as well. All right. Here is Sasha with the first question.
Sure. So I'm kind of interested, and Mark, maybe this one might be best targeted to you, just in the cost differentials. And in particular, we just saw on Friday the release of a pretty dastardly video from Microsoft that sort of had everything from knives and babies crying in the background, talking about how Microsoft Office was so much better than OpenOffice. And to me, I'm actually pretty psyched that this video came out, because it showed that open technologies are really driving concern in order to release this sort of attack video on open technologies. But one of the elements in there that grabbed my attention is they said that I believe it was it cost 30% more for these open technologies in some places because of the switching costs and the cost of getting these technologies ready and system admin costs and things of that sort. And I'm curious, Mark, and anyone else who wants to talk to this, given that you've actually implemented open technologies, have you noticed that you pay 30% more or are you saving money? And what are sort of the cost differentials that you've actually experienced on the ground?
Yeah, I saw that video as well, and I noticed that there were only quotes from OpenOffice users who had gone back to Microsoft. There were no quotes from the millions and millions of happy OpenOffice users around the world. So I had a wry smile at that point. The driver for us was learning. It just so happens that we are saving hundreds of thousands of dollars along the way. There has been, if anything, it's been easier getting support for open source tools. As I said, our learning management system, 45 million users. OpenOffice would have a similar number of people who use it, who are all producing freely distributable support, how-to videos, tutorials on how to do certain things. That's all freely available. There's no cost for the support side of things. Because you've got such a large community, you've got a lot of people who are able to problem solve for you. And it's been, as I say, learning was the goal, and we've certainly achieved enormous amounts of learning for students, but it just so happens that we saved a six-figure sum each year on the software. It's a difficult question to answer, because often schools will just not provide the software for students. Like, we have 3D modeling software on our computers. The really high-end proprietary 3D modeling software costs $3,000 per seat. So that's per computer you want to install it on. Schools just don't provide their students the ability to find out if they're bright in 3D modeling, because it just costs too much. And so it's an alternative, an option between not providing the software and providing it. And for us, that's reason enough to do it.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Turn it over to Lisa.
Could I just
Yeah, actually, go ahead, Lynn, please.
Yeah, I just want to mention, because I failed to in my presentation, our curriculum maps are available for free, and all you need is online access to use them. And actually, that's the one reaction we've been getting most often from people since we launched them a couple of months ago. We were open for public comment, taking public comment on the maps for a month, and the comment that we received most often was basically, "This is really for free, and it's going to remain for free. We just can't believe this." So we're hoping also, so no matter the economic status of the district or the school, they can use them. Another efficiency that we hope that they would bring, and that will come kind of naturally with the Common Core state standards, but then be further extended with our curriculum maps, is that if teachers are all using the same standards and the same curriculum maps, they can work very efficiently across a school, across a district, across a state, with colleagues in other states who are using the same materials, and get ideas and get great ideas and kind of model suggestions. So just throw that out there.
Yeah, so having that standardization as the platform. What I'm wondering is, for today's teachers in the classroom, is the barrier to using some of these materials, whether it's an open source software, tools, or whether it's finding content online that they know that they could put on a slide without fearing that they're somehow going to have copyright police after them. Are the barriers today that teachers just don't necessarily know what's out there, or is there something else? Is it that they still need their own kind of training in how to use these tools and kind of move between them? And I know, Michael, this is something you've probably talked a little bit about, but I would love to hear perhaps from you and Tim as well. And obviously, if you all can mention something quickly on that point, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, I'm not an expert on what adult teachers, these days. What I've heard through our council and sort of just through informal conversations with teacher education experts, is that in some sets of schools, the teachers are completely transfixed with teaching for standardized assessments, and that a lot of what's happened, unfortunately, is the creation of these test prep academies, and that teachers are just looking for things that align directly to the types of assessments for which their performance will be assessed under No Child Left Behind. So there is sort of this, I think, compartmentalization of schools that are struggling from schools that are doing quite a bit better in terms of the kinds of resources that many teachers are finding access to. So I don't know whether it's cost issues or whether it has anything at all to do with the lack of interest in finding open educational resources. I think that folks are under an extreme a great deal of stress. I do think also that certain assets that are available for free, such as the ones that Lynn has suggested and the ones that are via Creative Commons and OER, are not well understood yet. There is a lot of filtering of what's available. A lot of school districts are not completely clear on what's permissible and what's not permissible. And one of the things that we're concentrating on through the Digital Age Teacher Council is just thinking about making materials that are very well understood outside of school by parents and caregivers as tremendously educational, and connecting that sort of normative behavior that's going on outside of school with parents and young children to a more kind of normative behavior inside of school. And we think that that's actually has great potential. So I don't think that it's cost. I think that it's a lot of habits. I think it's the test prep culture of many struggling schools that make it very, very difficult, and probably some misunderstanding. But I don't think that that's the major issue on what open educational resources could provide. One last comment on this. One big issue for all of us who are in the educational media business is how to move from, how to be open and accessible to educators in particular, but because we're nonprofits who have a hybrid business model, we need to begin to think about how that golden goose of content transforms, which allows us to make back money for sustaining our nonprofit mission, how the content now morphs into a different business model, such as professional services or other things where you can charge some money if the content is open and free.
Yeah, I just want to echo your comments, and I'm not a teacher, but I mean the teachers we talk to are like, we don't have time to do anything else, especially when they're teaching multiple subjects, K-12 teachers. Some other things we've heard is that some school districts are kind of really hold close to their chest the stuff that teachers create. And one of our colleagues, David Wiley from Utah, dug into this a little bit more. He's like, well, are teachers able to share what they create? And it's a big contentious area. And he actually got the Utah state legislature to pass an administrative rule that said Utah's teachers can share what they create under Creative Commons licenses. So I think you're right in that there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding. A few other points. I mean, some things that teachers create or develop for their classes maybe aren't ready, to share. So we also need to take that into consideration. Some things are more amorphous. Some things just kind of happen really, really last minute. So. But for the teachers, we need to give them the tools to share if they want to, and also be able to demonstrate the benefits of doing that. So,
can I just say on that point, David? It's interesting you mentioned David Wiley. David Wiley says, "Without sharing, there is no education. Education at its core is in fact an act of sharing." Also, just to pick up on the word habit, we are not terribly good as a profession of breaking out of our habits. Where we long after the workplace that our young people go into have stopped doing that. Collaboration is important in every aspect of the economy. But we don't necessarily, as a profession, question those habits. And I think one of those habits that we've fallen into is holding on to our stuff. Before there was a technological ability to easily share and distribute and collaborate on things, we had no alternative but to keep what we produced within our class or within our school. Now the rules have changed. And we need to. We now have the opportunity to share and to collaborate, and we need to break out of the habit of holding on to our stuff and not sharing it.
Can I just add really quickly? If a habit takes physical form It's in these textbooks that have just been lingering in classrooms and in schools for so years, and are really so deeply mediocre, unfortunately. And it's the great teachers in our schools who are the first who want to throw those textbooks out. They're the ones that we are hearing from, and they're very excited to find a way to take advantage of the move toward the Common Core state standards, to maybe move away from those textbooks if they can get their principals and their curriculum directors to say you don't have to use those anymore.
Right. And also adoption committees that need to make some different decisions.
The state adoption lists,
Right, so I want to build on this. I also want to let everyone know we're about to take some audience questions as well, so start formulating them. I think we'll have a microphone wandering around, yes, in the back there. But I actually want to build on this a little bit, since my next question was really about this sort of notion of the personal interventions that people can do, and in particular joint licensing. And I remember about 5 years ago I decided I'm not going to give copyright away for all of my work anymore. And so I remember I was working with this one publisher, and I was like, hey, can we do this under a Creative Commons license? And they wrote me back and said, absolutely not. There is no way in hell this will ever happen. I was like, okay, just please remove my chapter. And they were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And we ended up doing a joint license. And in my mind, I think this is an area where, we often look at this as a dichotomy of Creative Commons or open licensing or proprietary copyright. And I'm curious if you'd like, Tim, this would be obviously right up your alley in terms of the joint licensing that teachers might be able to do. And Michael, I don't mean to put you on the spot too much, but I'm curious, Sesame Street has a pretty good brand, and so I'm curious, Creative Commons and copyright, those could coexist, and it would be fantastic if you could speak on that a little.
Yeah. Well, I think you're definitely right, and then there's been a movement, and people are just learning about copyright more. And we've kind of seen this a lot more kind of in the higher ed space, academics who create scholarly articles are retaining more of their copyright and not giving it away to large publishers. And Creative Commons developed with Spark and others an author's addendum. Essentially, I retain ABC rights, and I'm not transferring my copyright. Now, there's a problem obviously in higher ed with tenure and having to publish in the most prestigious journals, and if push comes to shove, I'm still going to publish in the most prestigious journals. But we see the ball starting to roll. In terms of the joint licensing, I think we like to look at it more kind of like as a spectrum of rights that that open licenses allow us to demonstrate, to communicate an entire spectrum of rights. So it's not black or white. It's not one or the other.
Let me make it clear that I'm speaking on behalf of the Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop now, because in our hallowed halls, this is like a really big issue that is going to take a few years for us to figure out. We're doing a paper actually now with Peter Kaufman from Intelligent Television, taking a look at ways in which one could create a different kind of a business model within educational media production. And there's been I won't get into it, a pretty furtive back and forth between Creative Commons and the educational media groups about what could be done with a Creative Commons license and what cannot be done. One of the big issues for us, which many of you may understand, but I was stunned, there's about 15 different rights holders who lay claim to every piece of video clip, that you see from the writer to the music producer to the animator. So there are very important guild agreements that have been created with all these rights holders. And so we're actually doing something on, which will be out in a couple months, the anatomy of a film clip on public television, and trying to kind of, break down some of the different barriers to opening these things up. So it's complicated. And what I said before about how, public media might become, more open is a real debate that's, going on outside, because you can imagine with 40 years of educational media production, within Sesame, it's very, very difficult to pivot. But there's a very good conversation going on, around this now. One thing that people may not realize is that in terms of the remix culture, and I realize that's sort of one level of Creative Commons licensure, there are real worries, as you suggested, to the brand Disney, for example, has seen its stuff used in torture moments. I mean, I won't make a comment about that, but there are the government of South Africa was very actively denying AIDS during the time that Sesame was creating an HIV positive Muppet. So if the government of South Africa and some of their adherents would have gone in and taken our stuff and created it for their own propaganda, there are worries about that. People in the Creative Commons community say that that's nonsense, that it would be corrected, immediately. But there are real kind of brand equity questions that people are worried about still.
We're going to open up to questions, but I wanted to just ask one thing quickly of Lynn, and I think it's related to this, and just to confirm, when I was on that curriculum map that you showed and what teachers could get to, there's a place, say a unit on for maybe second or third graders on inventions, and there's a place where you can click in and it'll say, you could use these books on Da Vinci to really bring some rich content to bear and talk about kind of inventions, and along the way you're going to be hitting all these standards. But there is not, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't then click to these wonderful, beautiful books on Da Vinci. We're still at a place right now where those teachers then have to go that next step. They've got to figure out how to pay for the books or find them or figure out what library has them or figure out how they can get images of Da Vinci's drawings, throughout their classroom so that children and students can look at them. And so I just want to make sure that I'm right. We still are we're at a place where the tools are there.
Right.
But
where we could find the relevant tools, we included them in an additional resources section. So we've just tried to make everything more organized, easier, speedier for teachers to find. But you're right. I mean, they have to, go to the library, find the book, get permission maybe to buy it. So there are still a series of barriers there in front of them.
So we do have a long way to go. Okay, so Sasha and I'll tag team on this a little bit and taking questions, and feel free, Sasha, to follow up with many more that he has as well. But let's go to the back. Maggie, if you could, the man in the very back there, please. Thank you. And if we could just make our questions real short, just go straight to the question if you can, after introducing yourself, please. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Stuart Miller. I'm a retired technologist. I'm interested in the panel's views on the fact that the adult world these days is so dependent on collaborative devices, social media, personal devices, and so on. And, of course, in schools, they are mostly banned from the classroom. I wonder if what views the panel has on maybe changing that.
Well, I think that I'll go really briefly. It starts in early childhood. I mean, these are normative behaviors that have come out of our interest in competing, cooperating global economy. And if we don't set that as the bar for all of our kids beginning, in the preschool years, then we'll continue to have this moat between what, employers want or what the communication capabilities and technology capabilities of our society dictate from what children are learning. So I think it is largely normative behavior that starts early in school, and that we gotta within reason take off the filters, lift the bands, and create a totally new connection between what kids are doing outside of school and what they're doing inside school.
I'd actually like to build on this question because I think it is very interesting. I remember back in my day, beepers were the big thing that no teacher wanted in their classroom, and now it's cell phones, but there's this tension, right? Mark, I'd be curious how you deal with this in your school in terms of all these devices, all social networking, all the doodads and consumer devices that are out there, are both incredibly powerful and useful tools for education, and also a mighty distraction that can pull people completely into a virtual world so that they're not really in the classroom. And I'd be curious, there's no right answer here, but I'm curious as your thoughts on this.
We're at one end of the spectrum in that we not only allow student-owned devices, and that could be a laptop, could be a cell phone, we actually encourage the students to bring their own devices. And it comes back to that strength-based model as well. These are the tools that the students are comfortable with. and they're the tools that we should be leveraging in order to help them learn. So we encourage them to bring a laptop of whatever flavour they like. The trick for us really is about getting our heads around the possibilities for learning. So cell phones, for instance, most of them are equipped with a camera. They're essentially pocket recorders of evidence of learning. And so we actually get our students to use the cameras on the cell phones, videos and stills, to record Spanish orals, to record themselves doing basketball layups, and then use that as a reflection tool. So to look over that footage, get feedback from others, and then set new learning goals and next steps, and go again. They can prove to be a distraction. Has anybody forgotten to turn their cell phone off in the audience today? I mean, we're all distracted by them, but one of the things we need to do is encourage our students, teach our students, that's our job, we're their teachers, to teach those appropriately. So our students, they always have their phones on silent, because ringing when or beeping when you've got a text is what old people do. Our young people have their phones on silent. If their phone rings and it's important enough, it might be mum or dad, they quietly excuse themselves from class, go over to the side, take the call, step outside, and then come back in. Our job is to teach them that etiquette, and we would expect nothing less if we were in a meeting in a boardroom. When you get to university, you don't hand your cell phones in at the door. We trust our students, but it's really beholden on us to teach them the right and the wrong way to use those.
Yeah, Mark stole my line. I was going to say, well, if any of our cell phones went off right now, we would just be so embarrassed. I was actually texting very briefly during a completely tedious movie I went to with my husband the other day, and somebody shushed me from the row behind. I wasn't making any noise. I just think that as long as we're teaching students that, the classroom isn't a place where important activity occurs, and it isn't just like every other place where you can hang out at the cafe and text and make whatever kind. I do think that that's a distinction that needs to be protected, just like in the movie theater when everyone wants to quietly concentrate on the film. So I think that that's terribly important, and it's a harder distinction to keep these days than it was previously in the years just of beepers. But it's therefore all the more important.
I just want to, just really quick, technology is crucial if we want to get good data on what works and what doesn't. So I think we just need to be focusing our efforts there, and not kind of shooting ourselves in the foot in as much as we say that traditional textbooks or print textbooks aren't doing it anymore. Let's kind of adopt this technology in a smart way that gives us that feedback.
In 10 more seconds, look, the reason why beepers were banned was it was a safety. There were drug deals being made with the beepers. So let's be honest. There are certain norms of behavior, as Lynn was suggesting, that are important to enforce. You cannot cheat with your cell phone. There are things that really need to be part of the normative classroom. I'm just saying, let's get on with it.
We'll go in the back here as well.
My name is Mark Nadell. Quick question about a barrier that you have not mentioned. I think all 50 states have boards that approve textbooks, and so
not all 50, but
a lot of them, Texas at least,
in the 2 dozen.
Yeah, and that presumably, if I just use a short clip from the internet, I'm not in trouble. But if I use Lynn's map to create great content from PBS material, and it all is free, and I use it to replace my textbook, some state boards are going to go bonkers and say, no, you got to get approved. Is that something that people are discussing or trying to deal with?
Well, I've had conversations with the National Governors Association about getting them to look at, to be honest, the Common Core state standards themselves have an appendix, Appendix B, that lists dozens and dozens of what they call exemplar texts. These are pieces of literature and informational texts, not textbooks. Well, there's one truly excellent textbook in there, but all the rest is is the other kind of material. And to talk to the governors about getting those books, at very least, these exemplars, on the state adoption list. Because the state adoption lists aren't just textbooks, they're other books too, that the schools do not have permission to use their public resources to purchase if they're not on those lists. So that conversation is starting. I think it will be moved forward, I hope, by the Common Core state standards. That is, unless the textbooks companies really step on the accelerator and try to produce materials that they're able to convince the states and districts to use that are aligned with the standards, and to go that route instead of using open source type materials and primary documents and resources and so on and so forth. There's a bit of a race. There's a bit of a quiet race kind of going on out there between the publishers who would like to capture kind of the very large market that will kind of be reborn in light of the widespread adoption of the Common Core state standards. I understand they're a little slow on the take, and some of the rest of us have started working toward providing quality materials a bit more readily, but they're obviously a very, very influential multi-billion-dollar industry, so we'll have to see what happens.
And just to that real quickly, we did some calls over to Texas to find out a little bit more about how things are working there, because it's a very interesting place. Yes, you have the conservative board making its approval decisions on social studies texts and others. You also, though, have a case where the legislature just passed one of the first e-textbook laws in the country that is actually moving towards a more open and open sourcing of textbook materials. And so this summer they just had, for the first time, they kind of opened up, there were requests for proposals to have anybody out there who had what they called an open source textbook. And the problem, I think, partly was it was very hard, that they didn't really define what that meant. But they had that open, and they accepted proposals, and then they wanted to check against various other standards, whether they lined up. Were they accessible to all kids? Were they going to cover a full year's worth of content? And they found that none of them met those standards. None of the proposals that were submitted met those particular standards. But the law is now on the books, and so they'll be, next year they'll have another chance to see who will submit and if they'll meet certain standards then. And this is something we would like to track more closely here. It's something we've been interested in, and maybe some of you in the audience even know of other states that are doing similar things with their regulations and laws. So we'll go to another question. I think there were a couple of folks up in the front who had, yes, sir, right here.
Hi, I'm Larry Bram, and I don't want to sound totally curmudgeonly because I just started a digital media company, so I'm certainly in on digital media. But so two related questions. What are the role of commercial publishers in this vision? Are they all gone? Are all the authors who are making livings have to find a new way to make a living? And the second related question is, we're talking about open, yet the most popular product out there is the most closed, the iPad. And people are buying it because it's so closed and safe. So how is this all reconciled?
An excellent question. I think it's one a lot of us are grappling with. Is there anyone on the panel that wants to speak to that or has some ideas?
I don't have any. I don't even have an iPad, so I don't have any knowledge of that.
Well, I'd mentioned the textbook publisher Flat World Knowledge, and obviously they're not a traditional kind of huge publishing house. But how are they able to do it with Creative Commons licensed content and offering it to remix chapters of textbooks, and then being able to sell it for $20 for a black and white copy, $45 for a color copy, whereas $150 for my chemistry textbook? It's like, how do those two things kind of compute? So,
what is their business model? Are they making money?
I don't know if they're making money. Their business model is selling those supplementary materials, but providing the free access online and the customizability online. It's kind of to be seen yet whether it's going to be a long-term success. but I think it's interesting that they're trying it out, and they're creating books as we speak. So
I don't think it's curmudgeon-y at all. I think it's the big question as to whether or not open educational resources will meet a sustainable business model that is not just philanthropic in nature and isn't just higher ed driven. I mean, there is a big debate going on within not only for-profit commercial publishing companies, but as I alluded to earlier, nonprofits such as my own mothership, which is very worried about how they would transition from a licensing and rights holders protected content-oriented system to one that could possibly go the way of, before the iTunes was created, the music industry. So there's a lot of fear about it. Some of it is misinformed, and some of it is still very much legitimate. So until organizations like Flat World Knowledge prove that they have a sustainable business model, people will wonder what it's going to look like. One thing that I do definitely see happening on your first question in the nonprofit educational media space is a move from the traditional focus on content as king by itself to ways of thinking about all sorts of different distribution models. Ways of partnering with Google and Apple, ways of thinking about a range of ways in which we will continue to get money from, parent, consumers, but create different kinds of licensure for adult uses of our media. Those things are all on the table right now, and I think that there's going to be a new mix of strategies that will evolve over the next few years.
Yeah, let's go right here.
Thank you, Siegel, Education Free Agent. I wanted to pick up on
something. Is that an organization?
It's trademarked. Yeah, actually, it's me. An organization of one.
Do you get any signing bonuses?
I wanted to pick up on something you had started talking about, Michael, and that Marx is a proof of concept of. It's a design issue. Has any thought been given with Creative Commons or other venues of bringing the kids and the teachers together, co-creating the curriculum, the instruction, the competencies, and the assessment? Because in my mind, the real disruptive innovation here is redesigning the teacher-student relationship as co-creators of learning and putting in the hands of kids and teachers 24/7 assessments so that they know they're learning in real time. So you're all leading to that, but I'm just wondering if there are any examples out there or a way to accelerate that conversation and then have the policymakers be informed by it so they can support it through policy incentives. Thank you.
I know of a few instances, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. The MacArthur Foundation, through the Digital Media and Learning Initiative, have stimulated a number of different initiatives. The best known one is something called the Digital Youth Network, which is based in Chicago, which has now become something called, they have tools called iRemix, which allows children to co-construct a whole range of different types of media integration into curriculum strands. There's also a lot of new tools for discovery and creation that are being created by organizations such as my own. For example, the electric company, which is back at Sesame Workshop, is now online allowing children to take story episodes and do their own storyboarding, mixing and matching the variety of different pieces of the literacy experience that the children themselves experience. Then we're using that user-generated content as something that we're putting up for the 3 million children a week who are using the media to raid and think about. So in that spirit, we're looking at those sorts of things.
Our maps are open for comment by anyone. So for example, if a parent has a child in school and their teacher is working from our curriculum maps, they could go online and pick out a particular book that is in our maps that the teacher used in the classroom and say, this book was great, my kid couldn't stop reading it, every kid should read it, or the student obviously could weigh in and say that, or they can say, tell us this was terrible, my student couldn't connect to it, it's actually not on grade level. Same thing with any of our sample lesson ideas, student objectives, so on and so forth. So we will not be allowing people to go in and actually make changes in our maps, but the commenting will be so ongoing and cumulative, we expect it to really be kind of a vehicle through which our maps will become richer and smarter and wiser over time. And we will, of course, be looking at those comments and make changes as appropriate as we go forward.
Mark, do you have anything?
Something that Lynn's just talked about that I don't think we've covered in the discussion so far is the notion of peer review. What she's really talking about is peer reviewing those resources and improving the quality of them. That at its core is what open content is about. It's the ability to bring thousands, hundreds of thousands of pairs of eyes to a resource and to improve that resource. And with that peer review, you also get the ability to represent diverse voices. In traditional textbooks, traditional media, you'll either have bias or you'll have a couple or three views on a subject. There's nothing stopping a dozen voices from emerging in one of these free content textbooks to tell different perspectives of the same story, and that's a very, very rich, very powerful tool that we as educators, I think, are only starting to get our heads around the potential of. Is there a way to fast track that? I think there is, and it's about giving power to the people. It's about getting teachers and students to hook into a project that's really focused in their classroom on the content that they're studying that has meaning to them, and to start contributing. Most of these projects are free for anybody to contribute to, and that's the best way to get in and do it.
Right. I think we have time for about one more question, so I'll turn it over to Lisa to bring us on home.
Why don't we go right there? Mel, thank you.
Hi, my name is Gary Epstein. To what extent are these wonderful plans and visions for the future dependent upon getting adequate broadband to the schools, and both mobile and fixed? And in your view, how is that working in the U.S.? And I'd be particularly interested in how it's working in New Zealand also.
Mark, why don't you start in talking about New Zealand?
Sure. We're not terribly well served for broadband, particularly international broadband. My school is in the very privileged position of having very fast broadband, 100 megabits per second. The free software that I was talking about is not dependent on broadband. We have 250 very powerful computers running that full suite of software I mentioned before. That's not dependent on broadband at all. At the lowest level of free content, you can do that across almost a dial-up connection if you're just dealing with text. But to really unlock the power of multimedia and to have a really rich experience for students, you're quite right. Broadband is a really important enabler. It won't stop you if you don't have it, but it can certainly really increase the quality of the experience for those students.
And I'll just add that here in the United States, this is actually an area where the Open Technology Initiative has been very active. There's the Schools, Health, Libraries Broadband Coalition that's been doing a lot of work there, and a guy, John Windhausen, has been really leading up that charge. And there's some really interesting things afoot with E-rate reform that has just been passed that sort of brings us in the right direction. We're not done with that yet, to say the least. And then going into 2011, most likely, we have Universal Service Fund reform that was also desperately needed to help bring large broadband to American schools. We've been relatively successful in getting some form of connectivity to schools, but as Mark, I think, really drives home, you can't do this. You can't do Skype over a dial-up. So it's really important that that be improved on. All right, well, I guess we will call it a day for now, but thank you very much to... Pardon?
If I could, I was just going to add one last thing. Just
Go
to
for it.
End this up. Sorry. I just want to to say thank you, but I did promise in the invitation that we would kind of, I said conclude with a discussion of policies that could be changed, and we've talked about a couple of them here, and so I just wanted to do a quick little just mention a few that were discussed, and I think that there's room for a lot more discussion and listing out of these, but we're talking at the local level of everything from what kind of devices should be allowed in the classroom to kind of how teachers even operate their classrooms. At the state level, we're talking about everything from how state boards of education change their textbook approval processes, if they have those in place, or even what kind of laws are available that may either restrict or open up the ability for teachers to share material and content they've created, or districts to do so. And then at the federal level, there's just obviously we didn't get into a lot of it here, but the point that Michael made earlier about how right now the emphasis on on standardized testing, which in the early education initiative, we absolutely believe the testing, we need the testing, we need the data on how kids are doing, but we also need to be thinking about how it's so far changing the dynamic in the classroom to the point that the teachers don't feel like they have the ability to kind of open up and be flexible in the way that they're teaching some things. So that's part of the conversation that needs to go forward. Obviously, there are a lot of other places where the concept of opening up technology in service of teaching, those two pieces, it can come together, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue these kinds of dialogues here at New America to have a more robust, maybe perhaps a list of recommendations in the future. Thank you to everyone. Thanks to Sasha for co-hosting this with me, and if we could give everybody up here a round of applause for their participation today. And thank you, Mark, for being awake for us there in New Zealand. We really appreciate it.
99.
Okay, have a great day, everybody.